dopo la crisi. Continueremo con questo sistema economico di ingiustizia sociale e di disprezzo per la cura dell'ambiente, del creato, della casa comune.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this new webinar of Economy of Francesco, titled The Paradox of Prosperity. Just a few words before leaving the floor to Maria Virginia and Rita, two of the most proactive entrepreneurs and change makers who currently operate within economy of Francesco, and specifically our village, the Agriculture and Justice Village. Also, I will give the floor to our kind guests, Karen Dillon and Efosa Ojomo. And I take this occasion to thank all the people, Karen, Efosa, Maria Virginia, and Rita for being here today. I'm Valentina Cattivelli. I'm a regional economist, and my last research commitment was related to the study of social farming and its contribution to the local development of remote and rural areas, social inclusion of marginalized people, and women empowerment. I was also the guest editor of Sustainability Journal, and I promoted the publication of 17 articles on these topics. And I find that a special kind of innovation, like social innovation, is sometimes the key to promote the local development. So it is a new form which assume new importance in the local development. I'm also the co-coordinator of Agriculture and Justice Village, and I'm so proud of this role because in the last 6 months I had the opportunity to get in touch together with more or less 6 young entrepreneurs, change makers, and researchers from all around the world. And together with them, we discussed a lot about the current problems that affect our agricultural and agro-industrial systems. As you know, in fact, agricultural and agri-industrial systems are unsustainable. Pressures on natural resources become unsustainable, and agricultural practices, conditions, and at the same time define climate changes. Jobs in agriculture are not adequately remunerated, and agricultural incomes are very low. Millions of small farmers do not access to the market, and the exploitation of jobs in agricultural, especially of migrants, is a very serious problem, but it is not addressed by adequate means. Prices do not reflect social and environmental externalities, and the role of women, especially in small communities, is underestimated. Millions of people suffer from malnutrition, and we talk about all these topics in our internal meetings together with all people who are currently engaged in agricultural and justice village, but also together with other international experts. We have, for example, had the opportunity to talk together with Fridtjof Capra, a professor at University of Berkeley. And together with him, we discussed about the opportunity to adopt a systematical approach to govern agricultural systems and to try to resolve the problems that I mentioned before. We talk also together with Carlo Petrini, the chair of Slow Food Movement, and with him we have underlined the importance of a new alliance between consumers and producers in order to valorize the local production. Together with Maura Latini, the ID of Coppa Italia, one of the key player of large distribution in Italy, we underline the importance of defining the true prices in order to capture the social and environmental externalities and recognize the values, the human rights of labor, and fight migrants' exploitation and unethical business practices. Finally, Paolo Groppo works at FIO, help us to compare recent agrarian reform and suggests some solutions to reduce and mitigate the negative effects of conflicts of resources. In parallel to all these discussions, the young people of agriculture and justice village were proactive in territorial development, startup, and research projects. All these discussions, all these engagement were so important in order to arrive now, after 6 months, to realize, to think, and to write some concrete proposals to resolve the problems I mentioned before. So now we need to stop for a very short time all these activities and concentrate our efforts on the formulation of some proposals to submit directly to the Pope Francis. Our goal in these few weeks up to the great event in November is to formulate some concrete proposals in order to change the agricultural and agro-industrial systems. So all young people of our village is now involved in this activity and tries to finalize all the inputs, all discussion we have had in these months in this direction. Next November, in fact, Pope Francis will listen all these proposals and sign a pact with the young people in order to engage himself and also the young people to realize all these proposals in the next months. So I'm sure that also you, Karen and Efosa, today will give us some inputs, ideas, suggestions in order to finalize our thoughts, our ideas, our proposals. And I know that also this webinar will be interesting for us. So thank you again for coming here and having accepted our invitation. So thanks again.
It's our pleasure to be here.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So Nico, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Valentina. My name is Nico Lauritsen. I am a PhD student from the University of Bologna in FinTech and alternative finance. But at the same time, I follow some different startup projects. Specific one is on the creation of the market to wasted food, also to fight hunger through a digital platform. But today I will be the moderator of this discussion. We have the honor and the pleasure to have with us the two co-authors of the last book made by Clayton Christensen, Karen Dillon, who is also a former editor from the Harvard Business Review, and also Efosa Ojomo is a senior researcher at the Clayton Christensen Institute. Personally, I use innovation theory every day to support startups to design their products, and also from a researcher point of view, to try to look at all the changes in the financial institution, not only in consolidating market like US and Europe, but also in developing countries. I really think that market creation can help us to redesign and rethink a different way of finance, can be more resilient and more inclusive. But in the end, I think that Clayton leaves us with a big gift. The lens to use innovation theory to redesign and rethink the future. And now it's our turn to use this lens. But to start this conversation, I would like to have more links, more insights about innovation theory, disruptive innovation, market creation, also contextualized to the prosperity of our society in this pandemic era. So, Karen, Efosa.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, what I'd love to do today is sort of ask some questions of Efosa, and I'll join in on the conversation on what is the big idea in this book. And as you mentioned, it was the last book that Clay Christensen wrote. We were so grateful and lucky to be able to work with him on this book. And in some ways, it may be one of his most meaningful to him personally, because he really believed that theories, the idea that you understand deeply what will cause something else to happen, can help solve some really difficult problems. And he cared profoundly about helping the world become a more prosperous place. So that's the basic idea in the book. But let me start with asking Efosa to talk a little bit about a theory to solve prosperity. You know, what can you explain to us a little bit about, just at a quick level, what is the theory here? And then I'd love you to tell me why you got interested in working on this project yourself personally.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Nico, Valentina, and everyone on the planning team here, and all of you listening. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. You know, I think when all of us, or many of us, hear the word theory, instantly we think physics, biology, chemistry, math, theory, the hard sciences. But it turns out that we all use theory on a daily basis, whether you know it or not. And one of the things our dearly beloved professor wanted to do for us and the world was help people see that they use theory on a daily basis, and then help them improve the theories that they use so they can lead much better lives and more prosperous lives. And so a theory is simply a statement of causality that I believe, right? A statement of what causes what and why. And we applied that thinking to sort of the development industry and national prosperity. And so a very simple or simplistic theory in that industry is, if we who are wealthy provide resources to countries that are poor, we will help them eradicate poverty and create prosperity. It's a very simple theory. Now, many people may not wake up every day with that theory in their minds, but when you step back and look at the activities, what they invest their time, their money, strategy sessions on, that's the theory that they believe. It is, we will go into a community, for example, that does not have water, and we're going to provide water, or a well that provides water. And as a result of that, that community will have access to water, and then they'll have access to the things that come from that, and they'll be much better for it. So it's a simple theory. And what we've tried to do in this book is describe how that theory that we believe in providing resources to poor communities to help them prosper or alleviate poverty, it's temporary at best, and it limits our ability to actually think more creatively about how we can solve problems. And that's really at the heart of the prosperity paradox, which is the title of the book we wrote with Professor Christensen. It is that you don't actually alleviate poverty or eradicate poverty by trying to eradicate poverty. Instead, a better theory is if you focus on creating prosperity, which means something entirely different from solving poverty. If you focus on creating prosperity, then you can actually solve poverty. And the way you create prosperity is by focusing on a certain type of innovation, which we call market creating innovations. And I'm sure Karen and I are going to talk a lot more about that. But I just wanted to at least start there and say, you know, that's really at the heart of the book. It's understanding that we don't get to solve poverty by using a theory that says, let's focus on solving poverty. Instead, we solve poverty and create economic independence by focusing on creating prosperity through innovation.
Efosa, how do we define prosperity in the book? How would you and Clay define prosperity? What do you mean by that when you're saying we're not solving poverty, we're creating prosperity? What is prosperity?
So prosperity, the way we've defined it in the book, is the process, right, by which a society can improve economically, socially, politically, financially over time. Now, when you define prosperity that way, and prosperity is your goal, when it's your goal, then you know that when you go into a poor community that doesn't have access to water, you know that simply providing water based on the definition of prosperity is not going to be enough. Or a community where there are no schools, simply providing schools is not going to create prosperity. It may alleviate poverty a little bit, it may help a little bit, but because prosperity is your goal, you're thinking entirely differently about what the solution to the problem is.
So sorry, I occasionally am losing audio. I'll just let you know, Nico, in case I look blank, it's because I'm losing audio a little bit. Okay, so this sounds good, right? We want to basically, in a shorthand way of saying it is, we really want to help communities and societies become self-sustaining economic engines. They don't necessarily rely on people inputting money and resources that may change with political changes in the wind or money sources running out. We want them to become a whole sustaining, self-generating economies that create jobs and have good education and offer people good health and things like that. So that's the goal. So we agree on the goal. So now you said it's innovation at the heart of that. So wait, explain that, because that to me sounds, I don't see how you would connect those dots. So tell me about, what does innovation do that helps create this engine?
So yeah, thank you, Karen. A couple of things about innovation. I'm pretty sure if we asked everybody listening today, how do you define innovation? We will get as many different answers as we have people listening in. And interestingly, everybody will be right, or at least, mostly right. And so what we've tried to do in our work, our research, is define what we mean by innovation so that in conversation, in writing, we're all talking about the same thing. And so innovation is a change in the process by which you transform inputs of lower value into outputs of higher value, right? So it's how you transform labor, capital, equipment, things like that into outputs of higher value. That's how we define innovation. Now, from an economic development standpoint, we've identified 3 types of innovation. The first type of innovation are what we call efficiency innovations. These are innovations that enable organizations do more with less. Now, with efficiency innovations, you have things like leveraging automation or outsourcing a particular job or function to a region where it's lower cost or lower wages. Now, this is important because it makes organizations more efficient. However, they tend to have a negative impact on jobs and economic development of a particular region. All right, so that's efficiency innovations. The second type of innovations we call sustaining innovations. Sustaining innovations are innovations that make good products better. And so my guess is many of you have smartphones or computers. Think about the latest smartphones on the market, which much nicer cameras and more memory, faster processor. The smartphones today are much nicer than the smartphones 5 years ago. So the additional features are what we call sustaining innovations. Now, typically, sustaining innovations are targeted at customers that can already afford a product or a service. So they don't really expand the market. When a company adds a better camera to a phone, they don't build a new manufacturing plant, a distribution system, retail sites, R&D structures. They leverage the existing things they've built. And so the impact on economic development is sort of substitutive in nature. It doesn't really create significant growth. The third type of innovation is what we call market creating innovation. And market creating innovations are innovations that transform complicated and expensive products into products that are simple and affordable. In doing so, many more people in society get access to these products. And as a result of that happening, when you're serving many new customers who historically could not afford the product or the service, you necessarily create jobs. You create jobs in manufacturing, in the retail, in distribution, logistics, warehousing, and so on. That's sort of the power of market creating innovations. One example of that really quickly is the computing industry. So I was talking about smartphones. We all now walk around, or many of us, with phones in our pockets. But if you go back 60, 70 years, if you wanted to use a computer, you would have to go typically to a big university or a big corporation, very few in the world. You'd walk into a big room. They had multiple technicians working on them, very technical machines to use, and could only do a limited set of functions. Those computers were limited to folks who were wealthy and prosperous, not the masses. And so when you look at market creating innovations and what they can do to society in terms of creating prosperity, what you find is innovation is often looked at as the thing that happens after a society develops, after it fixes itself in terms of builds all its infrastructure and government institutions and corruption is gone and everything. But what we're finding with our research is instead of that, innovation is actually the process by which societies develop and fix themselves and create prosperity.
Great. Now I would like to give the floor to Maria Virginia, sorry, who is one of the girls participating of Economy Francesco. Maria Virginia, you go.
Hi, hi everyone. Thanks, Nico. Thanks, Valentina, and Karen and Efosa for participating in this webinar and sharing all your insight with us. Is very inspiring for us to hear your experiences. My name is Maria Virginia Solis. I am from Argentina. I come from a family working in agriculture, and I recently founded a startup that sells yerba mate, a traditional drink from my country, from small and medium-scale farmers to the US market. I am currently working with Rita, our next discussant, in the startup stream for our village, Agriculture and Justice, with other 10 participants from Colombia, Brazil, Italy, Poland, Mexico, and China. Our process started knowing each other, sharing our background, experiences, and the challenges that we are currently facing in our countries. Our team is integrated by members that are applying regenerative agriculture in their farms, researchers involved in agriculture innovation, farm-to-fork startups entrepreneurs, and people currently working in non-profit organizations with farmers. From a cooperative mapping, it is clear to us that the degradation of agricultural soils globally continues to increase, and farmers all over the world, and particularly in developing countries, live several challenges such as access to education, technology, and capital to support them fighting soil degradation. Given these injustices, we started analyzing specific problems and solutions. We believe that we need to build a new economy and systemic paradigm of life, which integrates and puts the person and the planet in the center. And that is why we decided to work in a systemic solution, developing model farms on the mission to regenerate our planet and promote more sustainable and fair relations between the agriculture producers and consumers. A bottom-up business model that could be implemented in our different countries, mainly in the developing countries we represent. We started with Lanlate Youth Camp Initiative in Nigeria, where we are working together with Rita in creating a model farm. We believe this way we can share regenerative farming with everyone and increase jobs for young people living unemployment. In Prosperity Paradox, you mentioned the importance of market creating innovation as the way to change the paradigm of reducing poverty into a paradigm of creating prosperity. You mentioned practical examples such as Ibrahim founding Celten and Indomie instant noodles in Nigeria. Since we find the same injustices present in farmers here in my city in Argentina, but also in other countries we represent as Rita in Nigeria, our first question is, how can we create and adapt a business model that can implement market creating innovation and generate impact for prosperity in places that are far away from each other geographically, but very close from each other when it comes to the injustices they live? My second question is regarding investments in developing countries. I am familiar with the startup ecosystem in developed countries such as the US, and when discussing or having one-on-one conversations with investors and mentors, they emphasize that in the industry of non-consumers, there is no money, or there is not a lot of money. Seeing successful examples in your book that started with their own investment or bootstrapping and got funded after years of showing prosperity and profit in the non-consumer markets made me think in all those startups that do not have access to the initial investments in our developing countries and would have been profitable in the long run if they would. How can we change the paradigm and attract capital from developed countries to developing countries initiatives when the current thought or advice from key decision makers is that this market, the non-consumer market, is not profitable and not as attractive as other markets? Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Very difficult questions. Maybe if I knew you were going to ask me tough questions, Maria, I may not have come. I'm kidding. No, this is good, and I think we need to lean into these tough questions. The first question about economies that are far geographically but are close in terms of the issues that they experience. It's an important one. One of the things that I would love for everyone listening to take away is where you start in a journey is not where you're going to end. And I say that because one of the ways I advise entrepreneurs is think big, start small, right? Think big, start small. Now, with regards to how you do that, one of the things that's important is researching and reading up on many of the big global companies we have today, or many of the market creating innovations we wrote about in the book or that we write about in our research. What you'll find is when they started their companies, they focused on a particular set of non-consumers in a particular region, and they really tried to understand in our language what we call the job to be done. Why are these non-consumers not consuming? What's the job they're trying to get done? And how can I create a product or a service that can help them? And so even though you have countries that are close in terms of the issues they struggle with, the fact that they are far geographically is a clue that, you know, let me develop a business model for the non-consumers in this particular region, and then I'll take some lessons from there, not just copy and paste, lessons learned, and try to apply it to non-consumers in another region. So that's one of the ways you can address the first question, is really focusing and then seeing how you can scale. I'll quickly address the second one, which I think is very important. I mean, one of the things that runs through our research is how difficult it is for entrepreneurs to raise funding, whether you're even focused on market creating innovation or sustaining innovations. I mean, there are very few entrepreneurs that wake up every day and say, oh, fundraising, very easy, like no worries at all. It's very difficult. In fact, I think less than 5% of venture capital deals, even in the US, get funded, right? Where we have a very robust finance capital industry. So that's the first thing, is to understand its capital is difficult, regardless of where you are. The second is market creating innovation capital. Again, whether you're in a wealthy country or an emerging economy, that's even more difficult because you want to create a market, create a market that has not yet existed. And so people will often look at you like, whoa, you're crazy. The third is, more practical. How do you attract capital? Some of the research I've been doing recently is on where do countries get the first sort of wave of foreign direct investment that can actually build a strong foundation for attracting more capital. If you look at countries like China as an example, 40, 50 years ago, when the country opened up, a majority of the foreign direct investment were from Chinese in the diaspora, Chinese people who understood China, understood the potential, understood the culture, but were living in other countries, and they were able to provide a first wave of capital. And so one practical way entrepreneurs in emerging markets and investors can begin to think about where might I raise capital is figuring out a funding platform, whether it's crowdfunding, that targets, Argentinians in the diaspora who love their country and understand the potential, but also know, some of the sort of top-down copy-paste models are not going to work. Let me see how I can support the innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem, is to figure out how to attract funding from them. And then you can begin to catalyze funding from other types of investors. So that's how I would go about that.
Thank you, Efosa.
Absolutely.
Nice, super nice.
Can I just add one extra thought? Sorry, my audio keeps cutting out, so I apologize if I'm sort of slightly off sync of the questions, but for Maria, One thing I also want to emphasize that we found in our research is the importance of business model innovation. So it's very important and very difficult, but important to not necessarily approach your product or service or business development from a known conventional business model, just importing what you've seen work elsewhere and trying to figure out how to make it work for your product or service. The most successful innovations we have seen have really, as much as identifying the non-consumer and the struggle that they have in a product or service for them, have also been extremely creative with their business model. So I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle to make sure that you are thinking about as well, in addition to understandably needing capital. But when you can find a way to make a business model profitable in a surprising and unconventional way that still serves your non-consumer customers, then I think that's another piece of getting it right and having the ability potentially to attract capital, but also maybe to get things off the ground before you need that extra bit of capital.
Thanks, Karen.
So I think now is the time to give the floor to Rita, another participant of Economia Francesco. Rita, how's going your connection?
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Greetings to Efosa, Karen, Nico, Valentina, and Virginia. I'm Rita from Nigeria, and I am a participant of Economy of Francesco. I'm also a graduate of agricultural economics, and I am practicing and working with Lalata Youth Camp Initiative. Now I have to talk about corruption. And for me, I see corruption as a virus in Nigeria. The difficulty involved with having a sane mind in Nigeria is really disturbing and alarming. I think it's very possible to still be sane despite what we're experiencing in Nigeria. In Fosa's talk, I listened to him and I appreciate the concept he gave in terms of eradicating poverty and reducing corruption through market creation and investment. I still believe a lot has to be done in the education sector of my country and in the formation of the young ones. There is need for a total reform in the learning institutions and total conversion of every human person in Nigeria. Let us consider the basic unit of a society. The family is the basic unit of the society. Today, we find out that parents don't have time to take care of their children. The children are left at the mercy of a house help or a nanny, and the children grow up without values and moral formation. And you find out that morals and virtues are eroding away in our world and in our society today. The schools and learning institutions have little or nothing to offer when it comes to learning. You find out that children don't get enough moral standards they should get, so they end up growing without values and virtues. In Nigeria, we have policies and laws, but they are not enforced. This keep on going on, and you find out that we have a society that is full of corrupt people and mindsets. There is increasing rate of unacceptable behavior among citizens today in Nigeria. Poverty among the people also creates some ripple effects, evidence in violence, insecurity, kidnapping, and so on. Yet, Nigeria has what it takes to make her citizens enjoy basic needs of life: food, shelter, clothing. Unfortunately, an individual can decide to gulp all the resources meant for millions of people without anyone questioning or querying that. Sometimes I feel there is no hope in this country. Imagine the mindset of a common man. at the time of election, he feels that we should just take a bribe and vote a corrupt choice, or sit back at home to avoid the violence of the voting unit, or whatever they feel is not safe for them to vote. We end up voting corrupt choices, and this goes on, and in a cycle like that. A commercial taxi driver believes he must give bribe for him to go on the way. So a lot has gone wrong. The mindset of people is difficult to change. Seeing all this happening made me decide to seek out a means of on the young ones, and that is why I'm involved with Mind in the County Way for the young ones to appreciate different virtues and moral upbringing that is necessary for them to be sane in life. And part of what we are doing is the demo farms that Virginia mentioned earlier. I am of the opinion that those challenges are interconnected and they need a systemic solution. So the question I'm going to ask is, what strategic ways are there in respect to addressing issues of corruption systemically? Thank you.
That's Efosa's specialty category.
So corruption is a big problem. In fact, we dedicate a whole chapter in our book to the issue of corruption. We title the chapter, actually, Corruption is Not the Problem, It's a Solution. Now, it was a play on words. We wanted to get people's attentions, but in addressing corruption, we have to use good theories. Again, we go back to theories. I think everyone recognizes that corruption is bad, and it erodes trust in our institutions, in each other. So nobody's arguing with that. But in addressing corruption, we leaned into the issue scientifically instead of morally, right? I think everyone who steals money knows they shouldn't steal money. Everyone who pays a bribe knows bribes are not good, or at least most people who do. But people keep doing it, and we keep creating laws that say, don't do this. And so the question is, how should we understand corruption in a way that can help us realistically solve the problem? So we treated it more scientifically, sort of like a cancer. You know, it's no use when you meet a patient with cancer saying, cancer is bad, you shouldn't have cancer, it's a terrible disease, you shouldn't have cancer. The way we treat corruption is the same way. Corruption is bad, you shouldn't be corrupt. Corruption is bad, you shouldn't be corrupt. And so we said, why do people hire corruption? Why do people engage in corruption? And we found out that corruption for many people living in, you know, my dearly beloved country like Nigeria and many other countries is the most efficient way they can get access to economic opportunity in these countries, right? And so to understand, is this unique to, you know, Nigeria, Kenya, Bangladesh, India, or did many of today's rich countries have serious issues with corruption when they were poor? What we found is they had serious issues as well. The United States had massive issues with corruption and public embezzlement of funds. Many countries in Europe had issues with corruption, and in fact, some still do. And when we realized, as these countries got more prosperous, as more market creating innovations came to give people a substitute, right? To give people a good job, so your need for corruption was reduced. These countries we're better able to deal with corruption. You don't eradicate it completely. You don't get it out completely. I think as long as you have human beings, you have corruption. But what you try to do with market creating innovations that create jobs is you give people an opportunity that disincentivizes corruption. And so we think corruption is a terrible thing. It's bad, but instead of treating corruption in sort of a moral way, saying, oh, you shouldn't do this, we think most people know they shouldn't. What we've tried to do is be a little bit more scientific about it and understand, why do people hire corruption? And can we create a substitute that is as attractive or more attractive than corruption, so that when they come to a decision, right? Oh, should I be corrupt or not? They have a good substitute, and hopefully they pick that substitute. And over time, as society gets more prosperous, as the government gets more money, they can invest in law enforcement. And I'll leave with one final note before Karen might want to chime in, is, if you look at the Nigerian government, specifically, the government spends roughly $200 per year per citizen, of which about $50 to $60 goes to pay the interest on its debt. When you compare that to a country like the United States that spends over $20,000, a country like Denmark spends $30,000, then you begin to get an appreciation for how there's little to no economic opportunity for people in public office, but they don't even have enough of the funding to fight corruption in any meaningful way. That's something that often does not get talked about. And this is part of why, again, we try to understand why does this happen here? Why are we not fighting it successfully? Well, we don't have the resources to actually fight corruption in the way we are. And so we have to create a substitute.
I will just add one thought, and maybe a hopeful thought, that it really is possible for an economy to move out of corruption, and the United States is a great example. We can argue on another day, perhaps, about how corrupt America is right now. But if you look back to the 1800s and the early 1900s, America was terribly openly corrupt. There was just no question. And it was the beginning of all of these market-creating innovations in the American economy. The roads and all kinds of industrial opportunities that actually preceded the laws we now think of as controlling and containing corruption. So many of the laws followed these successful innovations in companies and finding ways to make things happen. It is, we think it really is the catalyst for that path. It doesn't happen by itself. It's not miraculous. It's not overnight, but it is very possible. It just, we think it's sort of the best argument for capitalism, is that capitalism can lead and good things will follow.
So here we go. I really think that is a great discussion, and I would like to focus more now on the pandemic side, because we are facing a unique period that will change radically our behaviors, our market in part, our infrastructure, because the pandemic have emphasized all this kind of critiques from our society, also from the economic point of view. If we think about the supply chain, all the supply chain are completely struggle for the lockdown policies. And I think we should apply this kind of theory to redesign and rethink our economy, our society in a certain way, because the pandemic tried to stop in a certain way our behaviors, our normal routine, and give us the time to think. And I think that apply this kind of innovation theory will create our society of the future. if you know, I have some more.
I'll just chime in. I think you're absolutely right. I think the pandemic is bringing into high relief both things that are working and not working. And I think could also be a really, surprisingly, but truly fertile time for innovation, because all of us now, all of us around the world have different things we're struggling with. And struggles we think are the, the sort of identifier that there's an opportunity for something. So it may be that innovation comes from this pandemic. And I think you're right, because we're all working differently, collaborating differently, time feels different. It might actually prove to be a very fertile time for innovation in the years ahead. And I think the potential for what that could lead to is really exciting and really wonderful, even though it feels like it's a scary time. It is a scary time, but it's also a time where innovation blooms sometimes in the most difficult circumstances.
Absolutely. I think the pandemic is going to accelerate certain trends and decelerate others. One of the things it's going to do for sure is accelerate the digitization trend that we already see. And so one of the things I always tell people when I speak is, if there are components in your business model that can be digitized, this is the perfect opportunity to do that. This is a case in point. Without COVID-19, I'm sure we would have talked about the possibility of Karen and I flying to Francesco and to be there physically. But the engagement, although it's different, can be digitized. And so now we're here speaking with all of you. And that's one thing that's going to go on. And so when I hear that as a student or as a professional, I'm thinking, if that's going to happen, what kinds of skills can I acquire so that I can be ready when more organizations begin to digitize components in their business model? It doesn't even matter what you are, whether it's a hospital, whether it's education, whether it's supply chain, manufacturing. The pandemic is showing us that digitization is here to stay, and it's only going to be accelerated.
Great. We have a question from YouTube, I think so. How we can apply market creation theory to mature market, if it is applicable?
Yes. So one of the things that often, we wrote our book with an emerging market focus because the idea of non-consumption is very visible in many of these markets. You go in and you see so many people don't have access to this, don't consume that, and so on and so forth. But it's also very relevant in even mature markets. Non-consumption is a function of what we call struggle. And so what I would do is look around at what the average person in a mature market is struggling with and begin to think about innovative business models that can solve that problem. So if I take the United States as an example, it's the richest country in the world by way of GDP. We have a growing higher education problem where many students go to school, they get student loans, and they struggle to find jobs after school that require college degrees and would help them pay back their loans in a reasonable manner. Some of them don't even finish the college degree. As an innovator, richest country in the world, I might look and say, oh, America does not have an education problem. There's a lot of schools, a lot of people are going to school, 90% people going to secondary school and so on. But if I look at the struggle, interview families that have experienced this, I can come up with an alternative solution to higher education. And a university like Southern New Hampshire University is doing this, where they've modularized learning, leveraged digitization and are giving people opportunities to learn at their pace for a cost that is reasonable and help them with jobs. Many of the boot camps, coding boot camps coming up, are also looking at this struggle and taking advantage of it. And so that's just one example of how we can look at struggle in a society. And we write about this in chapter 3, which is titled "In the Struggle Lies Opportunity" in our book. And so I think it's very relevant. You just have to look for the struggle.
May I just add one quick thing, Nico, to that? It's also harks back to what Efosa was speaking about in the beginning, the different types of innovation, efficiency innovation, which is trying to save money, sustaining innovation, which is trying to keep your customers with some new bells and whistles for your product. And then the third category, market creating innovation. So many companies in established economies focus on only the first two. Those have a role, but they only focus on efficiency innovation. Let's squeeze out a little bit more money. Sustaining innovation, let's keep our customers maybe buying a new model or whatever. And that's not a way to really grow the company over time. Real growth comes from identifying a totally new market, to create a market. So even in the most developed economy, the idea, the potential for market creating innovation should be very exciting. It's the challenge is finding the struggle, finding the non-consumption of something, and then building the market. But that offers enormous growth possibility to any economy.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Exactly. As a student of fintech alternative finance, I think that is the point, because access to finance is essential for the growth economy, but we continue to struggle to do that. There are many people that don't have access to credit, they don't have access to basic income and other product finance. So I think this kind of theory will completely create, combined with the digitalization, also new technology can also help us to fight these kind of issues. I think if you have something else to share with us, we have I think 5-10 minutes more. Also, then we can also, Valentina also have some conclusion or maybe some additional question from the flow. I don't know, Valentina.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so perfect. No, thank you very much, Efosa and Karen, and also Maria Virginia and Rita. Very good questions and intervention. Unfortunately, we don't have any more questions from YouTube, but I would like to ask, sorry. Okay. Okay, perfectly. Okay, from YouTube, are small businesses represented in driving market creating innovations in emerging markets? It seems to be a larger, better researched businesses that are creating new markets can have further research and development.
That's definitely not true. Those are those flashy success stories that you see now, but there are so many great stories in our book and that we can share of things that start with germs of an idea and a small company with a small amount of resource and turn into something magnificent. Efosa, do you want to tell either the story perhaps of Tolaram or MicroInsure, just to give us a little taste of how is it possible for a small idea with small resources to build into something magnificent?
Absolutely. I mean, I think on the surface, that's what it looks like. It's the big ones. But MicroInsure started out about 15 years ago, maybe 20, and about 15 years ago, yes. And it's focused on giving people access to insurance. Many people who live on less than $3 or $5 a day. And when it started, it was a blip. It wasn't even a blip on the radar. It was tiny, and they didn't have access to financing. They had to get a lot of grants. But today, that company provides insurance to close to 80 million people across several emerging markets, from Ghana to India, to Bangladesh, to Kenya. It's serving customers that the conventional insurance industry would have looked at and said, there's no opportunity here. These people can never buy insurance, but this company over time has been able to create the market, which connects to my earlier point in think big, start small, especially when you don't have the resources, because when you scale too fast, you scale the good and the bad. And so you want to think big, start small, learn, and then scale.
Part of the learning in the starting small that's really important is for us, by us. And so we talk about in the book is that you understand your community, your market, the struggles, the opportunities better than any outsider ever would. And so understanding that deeply means that the product or service that you create to respond to it is far more likely to be successful than something that somebody else imagines is what's needed in those cases. So starting by seeing and identifying opportunities you truly understand will mean that you're far more likely to succeed. And starting small is absolutely fine. Scaling comes later.
So I think we are close to finish. I think Valentina has some conclusions on just a formal conclusion and said goodbye. For me personally, it was exciting, inspiring, this kind of discussion, because as mentioned on the start, I use innovation theory every day. So I think this is the point. Continue looking forward and try to think about a different future. Valentina, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Nico. I perfectly agree with you. It was a very inspiring webinar, especially for people who are currently working in a startup stream within our village, agriculture and justice village. So I'm very happy, and also I would like to create my business, my firm. I was very also inspired by you and by your description of innovation and the different types of innovation. This is a very important concept in economic theory, and I think it could be inspired several research activities also within our village. I'm very surprised, but at the same time happy to listen that innovation is the process by which the society evolves. So we inspire, we hope that within economy of Francesco, we try to give a very important signal, signs to change the society and contribute to change it. At the same time, also your ideas about the good business model or the relations among pandemic and also digitalization are all issues that are very important, and we need to focus on them in the next discussions within our village. So I would like to thank you for your attention, for your presence here, and I hope this webinar it will be useful for all people in economy of Francesco. The next appointment is for November for the great event together with Pope Francis, and I would like to look forward also in that occasion. So thank you very much. See you very, very early.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valentina.